on Redwood.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the spirit of the Shadow Chancellor's remarks that he wants a serious debate. On this side of the House, we don't favour austerity, we favour prosperity. And we believe that the way you create prosperity is to have sound money and sound state finances that you can afford, so that you have decent public services, but so there is also money and credit available to expand the private sector, create the extra jobs we need to get people into work, and to create the higher paid jobs you need so that they can be more prosperous in work. And I hope the Shadow Chancellor will understand that. I'm afraid he did make a couple of mistakes in his remarks. The first was that he wrongly said that people on this side of the House were calling for less banking regulation in the run-up to the crisis. Now, I chaired the Economic Policy Review for my right honourable friend, and that included strong advice that they needed tougher regulation on bank cash and capital, because we expressly warned that the banks were over-borrowed and over-geared and the whole system was very shaky. And I remember the opposition constantly warning about excess debts in the system, and he would be well advised to read what we wrote, because the warnings were there, although their regulators and they were not listening. And the other thing I think the Shadow Chancellor should remember is, if he rereads the Red Book set out a few weeks ago for the 5-year spending and borrowing plans for this Parliament, that Red Book makes very clear that there are going to be quite substantial cash increases in total public spending over the 5 years of this Parliament, as all goes to plan, as we trust it will. And as inflation is currently around zero, that will mean real increases are possible, just as in the last Parliament, despite all the noise from the party opposite, cash spending went up every year and real spending went up every year over that time period. It went up much more modestly than it had done in the excesses of the pre-2007-8 period, which helped bring about the crash, but there was room for small real increases in public spending, because this side does care about making sure that disabled people are properly looked after, does care about making sure that schools have enough money, does care that there are real increases every year for our house service because there is demand and there are more treatments. But I welcome this charter, Mr. Speaker, and I hope this government, and I hope this government will be re-elected, but I hope any future government will take this charter very seriously. Because the evidence is very clear that under the party opposite, they had a first 5 years or so in government when the economy worked pretty well. I give them credit for that. And of course, 3 of those 5 years saw them actually generating a public surplus. They inherited our prudent public finances, and for the first few years they ran with them, and it worked very well. So I refer them to their own excellent example in their early years. And it was only when they let rip on spending and credit and borrowing for the state and the private sector that things got out of control, and they showed that they could put the boom into the boom and they could put the bust into the bust, and they took us through the biggest and deepest cycle of the post-war period, with awful consequences for the poor and those who lost their jobs and people who lost their businesses. So I think we need responsible finances. We want growth. We want prosperity, not austerity. This charter allows us to do it, and let's hope future governments stick to it. The debt was only $380 billion for the whole state at the point where Labour ceased generating a surplus. It went up by almost $700 billion before they left office, and a lot of the increase occurred before the crash. It is now $1,600 billion, because getting it down is proving extremely difficult. I would urge the party opposite to understand that they jeopardised the public finances, they trashed the economy, they destroyed jobs and businesses. We don't want to go there.
All right,